Hi everyone, this presentation covers Chapter 27 on writing grant proposals in the third edition of Jacobsen's textbook, Introduction to Health Research Methods, a Practical Guide. In this chapter, you will learn that a proposal written to request funding or approval for a new research project must demonstrate that a new research question is important and that the research plan will yield an answer to that question. Here's an outline of the chapter. Section 27.1 goes over preparing to write a proposal. Section 27.2 covers identifying grant opportunities. Section 27.3 covers requests for proposals. Section 27.4 covers research proposal components. Section 27.5 covers writing a research narrative. Section 27.6 covers funding criteria. Section 27.7 covers budgeting. Section 27.8 covers financial accounting. Section 27.9 covers grant management. Section 27.10 covers unfunded research. So starting off with Section 27.1, which covers preparing to write a proposal. So what is a proposal? A proposal is a written request for approval of or the funding for a research project. This is a formal process of requesting to do a research project, whether it is to specifically get funding to do the project or whether it's actually just getting the approval to do the project. So first off, you may be just seeking approval for the project from a supervisor or review panel. And this could be, say, for a thesis or a dissertation. Or it could be that you're actually applying to get grant funding. Most planning and design work for a project must be completed up front before the proposal can be written. And this can also be done simultaneously, but the idea is that you write your proposal before actually conducting the project. And so Section 27.2 goes over identifying grant opportunities. The main sources of funding for research include universities and colleges, governmental agencies, private foundations, and nonprofit organizations or businesses. And so internal grants are funds that are provided by the researcher school or employer, whereas external grants are funds obtained from the organization outside of that institution. Some sources of information for funding opportunities include someone's supervisor or mentor, a university grant management office, websites of specific funding agencies such as grants.gov, newsletter and websites of professional organizations, or subscription databases that are accessed through library websites or institutional offices. There are many different listservs that can be joined that will send out specific funding opportunities. And so some of the things that need to be considered when looking for different grant opportunities are what research areas and types of research questions are supported by that grant organization, and how much money is available, and do they cover indirect costs? When is their deadline? And how long after the submission of the proposal will they make a decision about the award? And finally, how competitive is that award? So Section 27.3 goes over requests for proposals. A request for proposal is also sometimes called a request for application, and this is a notice distributed by a funding organization that is seeking applications from researchers who want to conduct research on specific topics that are of interest to the funder. And the funder may ask for applications to submit the full proposal or may have a multi-step process. So for example, they may request a letter of intent first, and this is a letter with preliminary research plans, and it states the intention to submit the full proposal. They may also suggest that a pre-proposal is submitted, and this is the brief research plan that is required by a funding organization, then they can invite you to submit a full proposal if they like what the pre-proposal says. They may also have people submit a letter of inquiry, and this is a letter that a researcher sends to a potential funding organization to see if their particular research idea might be of interest to the funder. There are also solicited proposals, and these are requests for funding submitted by a researcher after the funder has contacted the researcher and invited them to submit a proposal directly. There might also be contracts, and so these are delivered agreements between a specific funding agency and a researcher. This may be something just for a very specific product that is needed versus an entire research study. And all of these different activities related to grants typically have some sort of deliverable on them, and it may be that the grant is funded to have this specific deliverable, and this is either a tangible or intangible object produced to fulfill the terms of a contract-funded research project. So section 27.4 covers research proposal components. So the research proposal also is always different depending on the agency. And so the most important thing is to look at the guidelines that the agency that you are applying for has and the specific sections that they require. But these are typically what they will ask for: an abstract, a background and significance section, goals and specific aims, a research plan or a project narrative, a dissemination plan, a timeline, a budget, and then a justification of why you're asking for those things in the budget, so the budget justification, and then an information section about the researchers. So this could be written out in narrative form, but oftentimes they request what is called an NIH biosketch, and this is a specific format that the National Institute of Health has for laying out your previous research and your qualifications for why you should be funded for the study. So figure 27.1 goes over a typical proposal content, and it includes a breakdown of what to include in each of the different sections. So for example, the background, then your goals and specific aims, the methods and procedures, an analytic plan, a dissemination plan, references, timeline, budget, researcher information, and then they also include the optional appendices. These could be letters of support, so oftentimes the department chair, if you're a faculty member, will write a letter of support, or if you're a student, your supervisor or faculty mentor will write a letter there. If you're conducting research in the community, you may get letters of support from community members. Then if you have a questionnaire or a survey instrument, oftentimes the funders like to see that as well, and they may request the approval letter from a review board for the ethical approval. The guidelines from funding agencies and review committees usually specify how it's organized, so the specific sections that need to be put in place, and the order of those sections, then the proposal content and proposal length. So it may be that the proposal is 6 pages. It may be that the proposal is 20 pages. It may be that the proposal includes 1 page for the specific aims and 1 page for the approach. They're usually very specific about this. And it is extremely important for applicants to carefully review the instructions and make sure that the application materials follow these instructions before submitting them, because just not following instructions could cause your proposal to be denied. So section 27.5 covers writing a research narrative. Proposals should clearly answer 3 questions. What is the problem that the project will examine? So what are you going to study? And why is that problem important? Why do you want to study that problem? How will the project help solve the problem? And how will you do the study? Every component of the submission should answer at least one of these three questions. And if not just at least one, all of them. Section 27.6 goes over funding criteria. So there are usually a review criteria that is explicitly stated by the funder. This is usually within the funding announcement. For the National Institute of Health, they score their grants proposals based on the following: significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. And several other U.S. funding agencies try to model their review criteria based on the NIH. So Section 27.2 goes over these sections for the NIH review criteria and the specific questions that you should ask yourself when writing the proposal on how to meet each of these sections, how to make sure that you justify your research based on all of these questions for each of these criteria. Section 27.7 goes over budgeting. So budgeting should cover all essential costs of the research project, but not be excessive in the total amount of any category. It will include direct costs, which are specific monetary expenses associated with the research project. However, you must make sure that you're including only allowable costs. And these are expenses that are approved for a funded grant or project, as exposed to items that are not acceptable according to the terms of the grant or project. The National Institutes of Health has a very specific list of things that are approved and not approved on their website. So for example, a membership cost for an organization such as the American Public Health Association is not covered by NIH funds. So if you are going to a conference to present your research and you join the organization to get a cheaper registration fee, they will not cover that cost to join the organization. They will only cover the registration fee. And this is really important to make sure that you're aware of all of the costs before you spend your money. Another thing that's included in budgeting is whether or not they pay overhead. Overhead are the institutional costs of maintaining a research infrastructure, operating research facilities, purchasing library resources, and administering research functions such as ethic review and compliance reporting. So these can be very high. It could be around 50 to 56% for some institutions versus 65% or higher. Indirect costs include general research-related expenses that institutions incur but cannot attribute to specific research projects. And so these are facilities and administrative costs. Many funding agencies allow the host institution of the researchers to request a portion of their funds to be allocated to cover these indirect costs. Section 27.8 goes over financial accounting. Grant awardees accept responsibility for the financial management of their projects and must carefully update and maintain accounting records. And at the end of the grant and periodically throughout, there's a process of reconciliation. This is the process of resolving any discrepancies between the researcher's financial records and the reports produced by the institution hosting the researcher's grant or contract accounts. And so Section 27.9 covers grants management, and grants management offices are very important, particularly when you have federal funds. Any grant-related documentation may be required at specific assigned times or really any time throughout, and so it's important you have someone that has the knowledge of the different regulatory procedures and the paperwork that is required when managing your grant. So there's the initial paperwork related to accepting the terms and the conditions of the grant. There are interim reports, including financial reports and scientific progress updates. Financial paperwork for the closeout of the grant, including a final accounting report and final project outcome report. And then there are other financial reports that may be requested at any time. So section 2710 goes over unfunded research. So many projects may require grant funding, and it's always encouraged that students, faculty, anyone conducting research applies for a grant to do their project to be successful. But many projects can be successfully completed with minimal or no cost to the researcher beyond their time. Although funding may open up opportunities to conduct more elaborate research studies, researchers without grant funding still have many options to do meaningful research. Submitting grant proposals for funding is generally preferred, though, by institutions over unfunded research. So that is it on Chapter 27 on writing grant proposals. Thank you for listening.